What happens to a person when the world falls silent? When the voices that once filled the air with laughter, argument, and love are gone, and all that remains is the echo of their absence? Have you ever stood in a room where every object hums with the weight of what's been lost? Where the walls themselves seem to whisper the names of those who are no longer here? Is it possible to carry the dead without being crushed by their weight? Or does the soul, like the earth after rain, soften and expand to hold them? We are taught that grief is a thing to overcome, a storm to weather, a wound that time will heal. But what if grief is not a passing season, but a country we must learn to inhabit? A place where the shadows are long and the light is strange, and every step forward is also a step deeper into the past. They died, and I was left alone with all the memories, not just the grand sweeping moments, but the trivial ones. The way they stirred their coffee, the sound of their footsteps in the hall, the unfinished sentences that hang in the air like ghosts. What does it mean to be the keeper of these fragments, the last witness to a life that no one else remembers in quite the same way? The philosopher Kierkegaard once wrote that life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward. But what if living forward means carrying the past like a second skeleton? A structure invisible to the eye, yet one that shapes every movement, every breath? The world rushes on, relentless in its forgetting, while you stand still, holding 1,000 moments that no longer matter to anyone but you. Is this loneliness, or is it something else? A sacred solitude where the dead are not gone but transformed, their voices no longer heard with the ear but felt in the pulse, in the quiet beneath the noise? There is a story of an ancient tribe that believed the dead did not leave the living, but moved into their shadows, walking beside them in silence. What if grief is not the art of letting go, but the art of learning to walk with shadows? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. But what if memory is not a tomb, but a bridge? A way of crossing into a world where time is not linear but layered, where the past is not behind us but beneath us, holding us up like the roots of a tree? The modern world has no patience for grief. It demands productivity, progress, the illusion of closure. But grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a language to be learned, a dialect of silence, of absence, of love that has nowhere to go. What if the purpose of grief is not to move on, but to move deeper, to discover that the heart is not a container with limits, but an ocean with tides, capable of holding an infinity of love and loss without drowning? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And in that aloneness, I found something unexpected. Not just the pain of their absence, but the unbearable beauty of having loved them at all. Ask yourself, what do you do with the love that remains when the object of that love is gone? Does it wither, or does it change form? Like light from a dead star still traveling long after the source has vanished? The Stoics believed that the only thing truly ours is our character, our ability to meet fate with dignity. But what if grief is the ultimate test of that character? Not in spite of the pain, but because of it? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And in that solitude, I discovered that memory is not a static thing, but a living one, a fire that burns, not to consume, but to illuminate. There is a moment in every great grief when the mourner realizes they are not just remembering the dead, they are in conversation with them. The past is not a locked door, but a threshold, and every memory is an invitation to step across. What if the dead do not leave us but become a part of us, not as ghosts, but as guides, not as wounds, but as wisdom? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories, and in that aloneness, I learned that to grieve is to love in past tense, a love that does not end, but endures. And now, a question for you. Have you ever felt the presence of someone you've lost in the most ordinary moments? In the turn of a page, in the scent of rain, in the silence between two heartbeats? What if grief is not the opposite of love, but its final, most intimate form? A love that no longer needs to speak to be heard? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And perhaps that is the most profound truth of all, that to be left with memories is not to be left empty, but to be left full, overflowing. If this resonates with you, if you've ever stood in that silent room where the past presses close, then you understand why we must keep exploring this. There is more to uncover, more to feel. And if you're willing to walk this path a little further, stay with me. Like and subscribe so we can continue this conversation, so we can keep peeling back the layers together. Because the truth is, this is only the beginning. What if the purpose of grief is not to teach us how to die, but how to live? To show us that love does not vanish, but transforms. That the dead are not lost, but layered into the fabric of our being? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And in that aloneness, I found a strange kind of company, a dialogue without words, a love without conditions. Ask yourself, who would you be if you carried your losses not as weights, but as wings? If your grief was not a chain, but a compass? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And perhaps that is the final revelation, that in the end, we are not just the keepers of the dead, but the living testament to their existence. And that is a sacred task, a task without end. I used to think grief was linear, that it had stages like steps on a path leading somewhere, anywhere other than here. But grief is not a path. It is a room you wake up inside every morning, its walls papered with memories, its air thick with the perfume of what once was. They died, and I was left alone with all the memories, not just the polished, framed ones we bring out for guests, but the messy, ordinary ones. The way they mispronounced that one word, the socks they always left on the floor, the way their laughter could turn a bad day into something bearable. These are the memories that haunt in the gentlest way. What do we do with the love that has nowhere to go? The love that used to have a home in another person's eyes, another person's voice. Does it evaporate like water spilled on hot pavement? Or does it pool inside us, forming new landscapes in the heart? The ancient Egyptians believed the dead lived on as long as their names were spoken. But what happens when there's no one left who remembers the way they said your name? When you become the sole archivist of a life that the world has already moved past. There is a loneliness in grief that is unlike any other. It's not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of knowing you are the last one who remembers a certain smile, a certain joke, a certain way of being loved. You become a living monument to something no one else can see. They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And sometimes, in the quietest hours, I wonder if I forget even the smallest detail, who will ever know? Who will remember the exact shade of their eyes when the sun hit them just right? But here is the thing no one tells you about grief. It is not just sorrow. It is also gratitude. A brutal, breathtaking gratitude for having had something, someone, worth missing this much. The pain does not cancel out the love, it proves it. What if grief is not the price of love, but its final, most intimate expression? A love that no longer needs to be spoken to be felt. I used to fear forgetting. Now I fear remembering too well, because memory is not a photograph. It's a living thing. It shifts, it fades, it grows sharper in some places and softer in others. And with every passing year, the person I grieve becomes less the person they were and more the person I remember. Is that a betrayal, or is it the only way to keep them close? There is a moment in grief when you realize you are not just mourning the dead. You are mourning the person you were when they were alive. The version of you that existed in their eyes. That version is gone too. And so you grieve doubly for them and for the you that only they knew. They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. And in time, I came to understand that grief is not a wall, it's a bridge between the past and the present, between the living and the dead, between who you were and who you must now become. Ask yourself this: if you could speak to the ones you've lost, what would you say? Would you talk of big things, of love and regret and all the words left unsaid? Or would you tell them the small, ordinary things, that the coffee shop you used to go to together changed its decor, that their favorite song came on the radio yesterday, that you still can't look at a certain shade of blue without thinking of them? They died, and I was left alone with all the memories. But perhaps alone is the wrong word, because when you carry someone this deeply, are you ever truly alone? If this speaks to you, if you too have stood in that room where the past feels more real than the present, then you understand why we must keep going. There is more to say, more to feel, more to remember. And if you're willing to walk this path a little further, stay with me. Like and subscribe, because this conversation is only beginning.